Hey guys, tonight we wander into the forgotten corridors of an empire swallowed by vines and silence. You're not standing in a museum or reading a dusty textbook. You're here barefoot on warm stone, the air thick with the scent of moss and smoke. Above you, the moon presses its pale hand against the sky, illuminating carved faces on towers that haven't blinked in centuries. You follow a path where roots have cracked centuries of pavement, and the walls whisper in a language even modern archaeologists haven't fully decoded. We're going into the Khmer Empire, but not through the gates, you know. Not through Jayavarman 7, or the Bayon's famous grin, or even the temple that tourists call Tomb Raider. No, this story slips through the side door, past the men with crowns and titles and heroic inscriptions. Tonight we follow the women, the queens, whose names history barely muttered, whose lives were eclipsed by stone but never erased. And trust me, you probably won't survive this if you came looking for dates and dynasties. What you'll get instead is rain-drenched palace intrigue, lunar birthing rooms, royal kitchens where spice was power and women who ruled by moonlight and misdirection. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world you're falling asleep with me. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing just outside the main causeway of Angkor Wat. Not inside yet, not under its towers or gazing up at Vishnu's 100 arms. You're beside the moat where the water barely ripples and the frogs sound like creaking chairs. And there's someone else here, a figure painted in moonlight. She doesn't speak. She just looks at you, then turns toward the temple skirts trailing the ground. You follow. It's not hard to imagine her being one of them, the queens we never meet in the history books. The ones carved into walls without names, the ones who ruled when no one was looking, when their husbands were away or dead, or too busy building cosmic highways out of sandstone. The Khmer Empire didn't start with kings. It started with land, rivers, tribes, fertility, and frankly, a lot of sweating. You walk through an imagined village long before Angkor rose, where women planted rice and watched the clouds like prophets. Matriarchs ran clans in these days. They weren't called queens because no one needed that word yet. They were simply she who decides, she who knows the monsoon. One tale, half folk, half stone, mentions a woman known only as the Lady of the Clay. She led her people after a volcanic season, when the soil turned hard and the gods stopped answering. No inscriptions mark her, but the story says she carried a spear carved from teak and made decisions while kneeling on warm earth. That was power. That was enough. Historians still argue whether these women were actual rulers or just highly respected matriarchs. But as you stroll deeper into the memory past fruit trees and huts that rise like dreams, the difference doesn't really matter. They controlled food, water, marriage. They chose where the village moved each season. And once supposedly, one of them drowned a rival by calling frogs to sing her to sleep beside a rising tide. Sounds fake, maybe, but so does a king with 100 wives. And he made it into the textbooks. The moon shifts. You're suddenly in a clearing ankle-deep in weeds, and ahead is something older than Angkor. Not a temple, a platform, raised earth. It may have held a wooden structure long gone, but the alignment facing Venus suggests it was ceremonial. A queen's court, perhaps, an offering site, or maybe a massive outdoor nap platform. Look, at Southeast Asia. People take resting seriously. Archaeologists found spindle whorls here used for weaving and traces of betel nut. The implication, this wasn't just a sacred space, it was social. Women gathered here, spoke in riddles, chewed crimson on their teeth, and laughed behind silk fans. Some held status, maybe even crowns woven from reeds and gold thread. We'll never know. You sit for a moment on a flat rock warm from the day's sun. Around you, the forest pulses cicadas now, and that thrum you feel more than hear. Somewhere a bird calls out long and low. If this were 900 CE, that might be an omen, a royal birth, or a sign of bad rice yield. Same difference. Your guide, if you want to call her that, appears again. This time she's walking toward a different direction away from the clearing. You follow, brushing past vines. She's leading you east. Always east, toward the sunrise, toward what came next. Because this was just the prelude. The Khmer queens we remember barely haven't arrived yet. But their world is being built grain by grain in the hands of women. No one recorded, and just as your eyelids begin to flutter as the breeze starts to slip behind your ears, you hear it, a quiet, rhythmic tapping, like fingers on stone, like the start of something important trying to remember itself. The tapping fades as you move forward, brushing aside leaves that curl like sleepy hands. The woman you're following never hurries. She moves with the patience of someone who's been forgotten for centuries and has nothing left to prove. You walk behind her into an older Angkor. Not the postcard-perfect grandeur, but a landscape still humming with possibility. You pass through grass-strewn fields over half-buried stones that once lined a royal processional route. Only now the only procession is yours, and perhaps hers, if she's more memory than ghost. You step carefully over the scattered evidence of lives lived quietly but powerfully. Clay pots, fragments of jewelry, a carved bead shaped like a lotus seed. The Lady of the Nine Rivers comes to you in a trick of waterlight. Her real name is lost, or maybe never written down. The name comes from a pattern 9 rivers diverted to feed the paddies during her lifetime. 9 that historians have guessed, though some say 5 others, 11. The numbers don't matter. What matters is that she knew the river better than anyone, how to listen when it swelled, how to coax it to curl like a ribbon around her people's land. She's remembered in only one inscription, or at least part of her is. A sandstone stele discovered in what is now Pre Veng province tells of a leader, likely a woman, who directed floodwater using woven maps of bark. No further context, no proper noun, just she of the woven maps. Historians still argue whether she was an engineer, a priestess, or a queen, but someone commissioned that stele. Someone diverted the Mekong's little temper tantrums for the sake of fields and fish. And odds are it wasn't a guy in elephant armor. You picture her now ankle-deep in mud reed staff, in hand-eyes scanning a horizon of silver rice tips. She's older than you'd expect, hair braided into a rope, down her back teeth stained red from battle. Her hands are calloused, and she wears bracelets of copper and shell. No crown, just a woven sash with symbols you don't understand. Probably directions to fix a dam you didn't even notice. You cross a stream now, barefoot, feeling the suck of clay between your toes. And just for a second, you sense her beside you, watching the water, nodding slightly, maybe satisfied, maybe warning you not to step on a frog. Up ahead, the trail curves into what used to be a royal orchard. The fruit trees are wild now, mango, tamarind, jackfruit, twisted and half feral. Your guide brushes a branch aside and gestures toward a pile of stones barely rising from the ground. This apparently was a palace. It's more like a suggestion of one, a foundation. Just a few lintels still etched with patterns, intertwined vines, running deer, the unmistakable curl of a woman's bun. That last one's important, because Khmer art, for all its cosmic flourishes and divine overload, paid attention to hair. The style changed with status, with mood, with what kind of royal you were pretending to be that day. A tight knot at the crown meant business, loose waves usually religious, a coiled bun to one side matriarch. Possibly dangerous, definitely someone who shouldn't be interrupted. You see that bun again and again on the surviving carvings, but the accompanying names usually male. This is the story of the Khmer queens. Their hair survives. Their words, not so much. You sit against a stone wall that once held up a queen's bedroom, allegedly. Again, there's no record, just oral tales and the pattern of ash in the soil, suggesting cooking fires nearby, which, let's be honest, probably means it was the real center of power. Forget the throne room, the kitchen courtyard. That's where revolutions begin, in pots over flame between stolen whispers and the slicing of lemongrass. The Lady of the Nine Rivers likely spent time here, not ruling with proclamations or parades, but deciding where the rice went, who got married, and which priest deserved a quiet demotion to goat duty. Power in this time was fluid. You didn't need a crown. You needed control over cycles of food, fertility, and flood. And she had all three. You lean your head back now, listening to the wind rustling tamarind leaves. A bat flits overhead, probably looking for something tastier than you. And you begin to wonder not if these women were powerful, but why we stopped calling them queens. Maybe because the term didn't fit. Maybe because later, king's men with better PR rewrote the scrolls. Or maybe, as some scholars now suggest, because the Khmer language at the time didn't bother differentiating royal female authority unless it absolutely had to. Power was just power. You stand up, stretch quietly, and step past the mango tree where someone once hung bells to mark court hours. A few still dangle rusted silent. You flick one gently. It doesn't ring, but your guide turns slightly as if she heard something. You didn't. She walks again slowly, and you follow not toward another ruin, but toward a pond, its surface silvered with moonlight. A frog chirps, another answers, and suddenly, you remember that story, the queen who commanded frogs. Okay, probably not true, but maybe in a way that mattered. She controlled water. She controlled planting. She listened when the world shifted under her feet and found a way to steady it. Maybe the frogs listened back. The pond stills behind you, and your bare feet squish lightly through the grass as you follow your quiet guide deeper into what once was the very breath of an empire. Her back is straight. Her steps make no sound. You'd swear she's floating if you weren't too tired to care. Or maybe she's just walking exactly how royalty should like be. She owns the very air around her. And in a way, one queen once did. The woman you are about to meet ruled not just over people or palaces, but over conflict. Not because she caused it, but because she mastered it. Some call her the battle-ready bride. Others don't call her anything at all, just the daughter who wouldn't be quiet. It's not clear which king she married. Some claim Suryavarman. Others say she ruled independently before the royal line was stabilized. All we have are whispers from local chronicles and temple reliefs, showing a woman in royal armor, yes, armor mounted on a war elephant. Her left hand raised not in prayer but command. Historians still argue whether she was real or just a narrative invention used to scare off enemies. But here's the thing, the armor fits. The timeline fits. The wars fit. And the cultural context, well, that fits too. Because Khmer society, unlike many of its neighbors, had a strange relationship with gender and power. Women could inherit land. They could divorce their husbands without being turned into soap. And in certain periods, especially during times of crisis, royal women stepped into roles that blurred the lines between queen general and demigod. Imagine her now seated high on a lacquered elephant, draped in crimson cloth, gold leaf, flaking in the heat. She's not smiling. She doesn't need to. She holds a short staff tipped with jade and inscribed with something not even scholars can translate. It might say protect. It might say mine. And yes, before you ask, she likely did ride into skirmishes. Not full-scale battles, more like diplomatic thundering, a show of presence, a message. Like, hey, I can crush your army and look graceful doing it. choose wisely. You walk under a crumbling gateway, now one that might have once welcomed her return from such displays. The air is cooler here, touched by the faint perfume of night jasmine and old smoke. A small carving above the arch catches your eye. It's damaged, but the figure seems to hold both a sword and a lotus blossom. That duality, fierce and floral, is a signature found in only one small group of inscriptions. The battle-ready bride isn't named, but she's described. She who breaks with one hand and binds with the other. That's not a metaphor. That's statecraft. And yes, there are other signs, whispers in diplomatic letters from nearby kingdoms referring to a lady of the central stone who must be consulted before any treaties are ratified. Some scholars think this might be her. Others think it refers to a council of noble women. Either way, there was a woman at the table and possibly flipping it. You move deeper into the temple ruins, now stepping carefully between fractured paving stones. A snake slithers across your path. Don't worry, it's probably more afraid of you. But in her time, snakes were omens, sacred, dangerous, carved into thrones and wrapped into myths. Some say her crest, if she had one, was a naga biting its own tail, eternal coiled precise. You climb 3 worn steps and find yourself inside what used to be a war-planning hall. Not that you'd know. The walls are blank now, but in certain lighting like the one you're in now, you can still see faint grooves. A mural long gone. Some guess it showed a procession of warriors. Others say it depicted a battle that never happened thanks to one woman's stare. Your guide doesn't pause here. She keeps walking, but you linger. You place your hand on the wall where the mural once stretched. It's warm, not from the sun, it's night, but from memory maybe. You close your eyes. You see her again. Riding, chanting something low, a command, a prayer. Her hand not shaking as she traces the map on a cloth spread across the elephant's back. Her generals bowing not deeply, but enough. Enough to mean they knew. And here's a fun detail for your dreams. The legend says she carried a pouch of red clay on her belt. Not for healing, not for ceremony, for face paint. A streak across her cheeks before entering negotiation. Her enemies never forgot that mark. It wasn't blood, but it made them think of it. You smile at the absurdity of it, of how history always tries to erase women's tactics by calling them theatrical. But theater wins wars too. You step away from the wall and follow your guide again. She waits beneath a tree blooming with ghost-pale flowers. You've seen this tree in Khmer paintings always, beside figures of power, always beside queens. She doesn't speak, but if she did, she might remind you that not all crowns are worn. Some are drawn in footsteps, others in the willingness to ride alone. The flowers above you tremble in the breeze, scattering pale petals like forgotten blessings. Your guide doesn't look up. She's already walking again barefoot across stones worn down by centuries of monsoon and monarchy. You follow because there's nowhere else to go now. The night hums with memory, and even the trees seem to lean in curious to hear what's next. You find yourself on a narrow path between 2 collapsed gallery walls. There are carvings here, still sharp in places, soft in others. Mostly floral patterns. But then near your elbow you notice it, a figure, barefoot, kneeling, offering something upward. Her arms are strong, not delicate. Her waist wrapped in silk. And her crown, there it is again, is not a full tiara, but a band set low across the forehead with 5 peaks. That detail matters, because you're looking at someone who may have built the very sanctuary you're standing in. Her name. Well, that's the problem. We're not sure. Some think she was the first royal patron of temple architecture in early Angkor. Others insist she's a myth. But what remains is a cluster of carvings and one disputed inscription that refers to the lady whose will rose before the towers. Poetic right historians still argue whether this lady was a symbolic reference to divine inspiration or an actual queen who oversaw the earliest foundations of what would become Angkor Wat's ancestral blueprint. Let's back up a bit. Picture the 9th century, dense forest, kings coming and going like weather. And in the background, always the background, are women of the royal family. Sisters, mothers, wives, some revered, some removed, some left offerings so large and lavish they had to come from someone with extraordinary resources. You don't donate 600 cows to a temple unless you're either very generous or very powerful, or both. Several of these donations are recorded on temple stele. And while the names often appear in male form, Jayendra Varman, Yaso Varman, pick your Varman, there are occasional feminine endings, usually glossed over until you start looking closely. Take Prasat Kraven, for example, a compact temple southeast of Angkor's heart. It's mostly known for its delicate Vishnu carvings, but tucked behind the sanctum is a small faded inscription attributed to someone named Lakshmish Vamani. The suffix Shvamani denotes female patronage, mistress, possibly even queen. Now here's where it gets weird. Lakshmishvamani doesn't appear in royal genealogies, not once. But her name is carved beside architectural terms, foundations, plinths, and sacred lines, which implies involvement, technical involvement, as in she didn't just write the checks, she gave instructions. Was she an architect, a sponsor, a regent in a lull between dynasties? The theories multiply like vines. You step through the remains of a long gallery. The columns are still upright, barely, and the moonlight draws long silver shadows across the floor. You can almost hear the footsteps of masons here, the clang of chisels, the soft bark of orders spoken in Old Khmer, a language no one really dreams in anymore. Your guide runs her fingers along a lintel etched with a scene of Sita, from the Ramayana standing tall while Ravana begs. The irony isn't lost on you. Women in Khmer art are usually passive decorative, except when they're not, except when they are the structure itself. There's another fringe theory, one not found in textbooks, but whispered among local guides and amateur epigraphers. It claims that one queen's ghost still visits temple sites at night, not to haunt, but to inspect, to check for misalignments, to frown at lazy stonework. She's called the Builder in Moonlight. Silly, sure. But you've just walked half a mile through jungle to reach a building made without mortar that's still standing 1,200 years later. Maybe silly isn't the insult you think it is. You pause beside a block that's been dislodged by roots. It's carved on one side with an unfamiliar symbol, a kind of spiral intersecting a trident. Not religious, not military. Some think it's an architect's signature. Others say it's a feminine cipher used to denote women's quarters. Either way, it doesn't match the king's symbols. It's different. And that's the point. This woman, whoever she was, left different marks. Marks that suggest vision, not just power. Marks that placed her in the blueprint, not merely in the back room. Your guide stops at the edge of a raised stone platform. She waits. You step up beside her. Below you, half swallowed by weeds, is a faint layout central tower library, 2 satellite shrines. Standard Khmer format, except it faces slightly northeast, not due east. This deviation still baffles scholars. It's off by just enough to be intentional, but no one agrees why. Some say it aligns with a specific lunar phase tied to a queen's coronation. Others suggest it was built to honor a female deity whose festival peaked under that star. Either way, someone chose it, not by accident, by instinct or math, or maybe both. And in that choice, she left a fingerprint. Not a big one, not a screaming "I was here," just a quiet shift, a small defiance, a reminder. You breathe in the heavy scent of stone and damp moss, and you think she might have stood exactly here. Surveying, calculating, smiling faintly as the towers began to rise, not for glory but for alignment, for meaning, for legacy that didn't need a name to endure. You linger on the platform, eyes adjusting to the dark geometry of what remains, heart ticking in rhythm with something ancient and unspoken. Your guide doesn't wait this time. She moves forward down steps, half swallowed by moss and roots. As you follow, your hand brushes along a stone wall where lichen glows faintly in moonlight like the memory of fire. The path narrows, the forest hushes. Ahead, it opens into a clearing where the air feels heavy, as if history pooled here and never fully dried. This is where you meet the battle-ready bride's distant echo, a woman who didn't just rule or build, but disappeared. Twice. She has no name in the record, only a reference in a palm leaf manuscript stored for centuries in a pagoda, now eaten by termites. It speaks of a princess who became queen in a time of tension, then vanished on the eve of a royal festival. Gone without conflict, no war, no recorded rebellion, just absence. Was she taken, poisoned? Hidden historians still argue whether she was dethroned, disfigured, or simply walked away, and then years later she returns in another inscription on a stele from a different province under a different name, performing royal rituals again. Same symbols, same lunar dates, same bracelets. But this time she calls herself the twin flame of the river. Is it her? No one can prove it. But the symmetry is too clean. And the Khmer loved their layers, reincarnation, rebirth. The idea of queens whose identities folded and refolded like silk in a monsoon. You step slowly now through the edges of the clearing, careful not to disturb the delicate ground. There's no temple here, just the remains of a wooden structure outlined in faint stone. Some think it was a private retreat. Others say it was a refuge for exiled royalty. The trees seem to lean protectively around it, their trunks thick with age and the memory of shade. If she did flee here, it would have been under cover of night, wrapped in plain cloth trading ornaments for anonymity. A queen turned ghost, a woman shedding oneself to survive long enough to reclaim another. But here's the part that rattles you gently awake. Her second appearance doesn't mention a king. She re-emerges not as wife, not as mother of heirs, but as a sole officiant of a festival, honoring Priya Nang Niak, the serpent princess of Khmer myth. In this ritual, the queen stands barefoot in a river, hair unbound, whispering to the current. No husband needed, no crown demanded, just presence. The stele speaks of her voice echoing across the water like a silver bell buried in sand. That line alone has caused centuries of debate. Is it poetic flourish or a first-hand account from someone who truly witnessed her return? You pause near the remnants of a low stone basin, perhaps once used for ritual cleansing. Moonlight glimmers in its stagnant water. Your reflection wavers briefly, overlaid with another face, older, wiser, watching. Did she ever really vanish, or was her disappearance just a rebranding, a form of resistance disguised as silence? In a world of court spies and ritual expectations, maybe the bravest thing a queen could do was vanish without dying. And here's where the fringe stories pick up, tales told by candlelight in wooden houses, on stilts where old women still chew betel and remember names no one else does. They say she became a crew, a forest priestess, that she traveled between villages disguised as a widow, helping women through childbirth, advising farmers on rice omens, and occasionally, in the darkest months, whispering in a language only snakes understood. She left no heirs, no citadel, but she left a trail of transformed names and temples with inscriptions that pause just before finishing. As if waiting, you touch a tree near the edge of the clearing, its bark smooth cool. From this spot, the stars stretch above like a cracked bowl of black porcelain, and your guide finally speaks, not aloud, but with her eyes. She points forward toward a narrow trail, its beginning marked by a row of stones set upright like guards. Each one is etched faintly with glyphs no one has successfully translated. One of them resembles a serpent coiled into a circle, another a pair of eyes closed in sleep. You step through. The forest doesn't close behind you, it opens wider, quieter. And as you walk, you wonder, how many other queens disappeared to survive? How many turned vanishing into strategy? How many names did they wear and discard like cloaks, while the world only ever recorded what the men wore? Not all absences are losses. Some are just rewrites. The stones grow smaller behind you as you move into deeper shadow where the canopy thickens and the night air cools. Here your guide slows. Her pace isn't tired, it's respectful, as though you're entering a place where names and voices still linger just out of hearing. You follow in silence until the trees part slightly and reveal a raised platform draped in thick vines. There's no grandeur here, no towering spires or celestial carvings, just the suggestion of space of presence. And one central stone, unmarked, unadorned, unmistakably deliberate. This is where things get murky, because what you've stepped into is less a monument, more a question. A structure without name, a platform without throne, no royal signature here, only records that speak of deeds, the weaving of alliances, the stabilization of temples, the sponsorship of rituals, but none of it signed by a queen. Instead, you'll find something far stranger. The records speak of a woman, always a woman. Her actions shaped the political landscape of the 10th century, redistributing land, orchestrating religious festivals, initiating infrastructure projects, but every royal proclamation bears the seal of her husband, a king, a name we remember. And yet, his actions only begin after hers are recorded. His reign starts where her decisions already formed roots. Her name is never engraved in the temple walls, but her hand is there in the distribution of temple rice, in the copper tiles of monastery roofs, in the unexpected promotion of 2 low-born generals. Historians still argue whether she ruled in his name or he ruled in hers. Some scholars refer to her as the shadow sovereign. Others call her the quiet regent. One epigraphist simply calls her capitalized like divinity, but never defined. You crouch beside the central stone, running your fingers over its weathered surface. It feels smooth in the middle, worn down by generations of palms, or maybe just centuries of waiting. Your guide kneels beside you, her hand hovering just above the stone, as if touching it. Too directly might break the spell. There's a legend among villagers nearby. They say a queen once struck a bargain with her husband. Let me rule, but let your name be praised. In exchange, she would keep peace, keep drought away, keep the gods fed and the nobles distracted. He agreed, they say, because he was more interested in hunting than leading, or because he feared her, or maybe, just maybe, because he loved her. And so while his name adorned decrees, her shaped destinies. You walk now through what was once a council hall. Wooden pillars, long since collapsed, their stone bases still firmly rooted in the earth like teeth. On one carving remains a seated man surrounded by advisors. His expression is blank, but to his left a smaller figure, just an outline, now appears to be whispering in his ear. Was it an artist's slip, an accident of erosion, or a careful nudge from someone who wanted to preserve the truth, just not too loudly? Another record, this one from a temple inventory log, lists gifts granted by her hand by royal will sealed by the lion. The lion was his symbol. But whose will moved first? You pass through this space as if through water, each step soft, each breath drawn slower. The woman you're tracing left no autobiography, no statue, but she may have left everything else. The names of her children, if she had any, are also lost. But many of the reforms attributed to her husband's reign bear a distinctly maternal touch. child welfare inscriptions, temple schools funded not by the state, but by royal stipends from an unnamed benefactor of the house. You stop at a pile of lotus-patterned bricks. Between them, someone placed offerings, recent ones, bits of incense, ash, a cracked ceramic doll, 3 jasmine flowers tied together with thread. Your guide picks one up, smiles faintly, and tucks it behind her ear. It's fitting, because women like this queen didn't shout. They didn't declare, they planted, they arranged, they aligned. Power not as spectacle, but as geometry. And in this section of history, that's perhaps the most radical thing of all. To rule not by proclamation or parade, but by leaving no trace you couldn't deny if necessary. There's something almost modern in it, isn't there? Your eyes drift upward to where the moon now hangs like a coin caught in the branches. Somewhere nearby, a gecko chirps loud and sudden. You jump a little. Your guide doesn't. And then, in the quiet again, you imagine her, the queen of no name, seated behind the throne, feeding the flames that fed the empire. Not because she wanted credit, but because someone had to. And he, the husband king, with the titles, he got his statues, his songs, his stone lions. But maybe, just maybe, when he sat alone, it was her silence that reminded him who kept the empire breathing. You walk on, following the soft curve of a path that narrows through fig trees and shadows. The air thickens again, less with heat than with the weight of the unsaid. The trees part reluctantly, revealing another crumbled temple, its steps uneven, its doorway half swallowed by roots. This one feels different, more intimate, less like a place of worship, more like a message buried in architecture. You step inside, brushing against hanging vines, your footfalls echoing softly. On the far wall, nearly erased by erosion, is another inscription, faint, weathered, incomplete, but still legible in parts. One line stands out. She walks beside him, her words shaping the sky. Not exactly standard fare for a king's commemoration, and not credited to anyone in particular. Just carved in soft Sanskrit, as if someone hoped the words would dissolve slowly into rumor. This is where the story of Khmer queens begins to unravel into fragments. Tiny inscriptions, half lines, and faint etchings hidden in temple corners. You've entered the chapter scholars call the era of implied queenship. No royal biographies, no official decrees, just scattered evidence that powerful women existed and did a whole lot more than embroidery. You kneel near a collapsed column where an unfinished inscription wraps around its base like ivy. It tells of land grants, of temple servants, of offerings. But here's the curious part. The grantee is always she. No name, no title, just that pronoun again and again. Historians still argue whether this anonymity was out of reverence or erasure. Were these women so honored that their names were unnecessary like gods, or so dangerous that naming them would have made enemies of the record keepers? Your guide runs a finger over another inscription, this one on a doorframe. It reads, "Let her offerings be remembered by the wind." Poetic. But what offerings, to whom and from whom? You step back out into moonlight. The temple glows faintly in silver, its stones smooth from centuries of rain. You wonder how many women walk this path before you. Barefoot gold bangles jingling at their ankles. Eyes sharp with knowledge the world was never invited to record. You're not alone in your wondering. Archaeologists have been puzzling over this for decades. They've found traces of female figures in temple art, some offering gifts, others holding ritual tools, typically reserved for priests or kings. In one temple near Bante Khmer, a bas-relief shows a woman seated beside a lion, not behind it, beside it, equal, present, real. Still her name? Missing. It's not accidental. Khmer temple records were exhaustive. They could list the weight of an elephant tusk to the gram. But here, across multiple sites, women appear only in gesture and implication. Never front and center, but never completely. gone. One fringe theory suggests that queens deliberately erased themselves, at least officially, not out of fear, but strategy. That some royal women aware of political instability or palace rivalries left behind only ghost impressions to protect their lineage. It's far-fetched, but here in the dark next to a vine-choked sanctuary, it starts to feel plausible. After all, invisibility is a kind of armor, too. You sit for a while near a toppled stela, its surface carved with intricate floral designs and what looks like a personal seal, a crescent moon cradling a dot. The seal repeats 3 times, each one placed near references to temple restorations, all funded by a royal consort of divine favor. Again, no name, but the seal's consistency suggests authorship, intent. You imagine her now a queen in the shadows, not hiding, just out of reach, walking the halls of stone at dawn, inspecting roof tiles, adjusting altar placements, placing gold-leafed scrolls into the hands of scribes she trusted. Maybe she stood exactly where you are. Maybe she stepped lightly across these same stones, aware that someday someone, maybe you would wonder who shaped the air here, who left silence laced with meaning. Your guide touches your arm gently, not to rush you, just to remind you to notice. She points to a corner of the temple wall where lichen covers most of the carvings. You clear a bit away with your sleeve and see a figure, a woman, one hand lifted, and blessing, the other pressing something to her heart. It's a mirror, not a weapon, not a book, not a scroll. A mirror, a detail so easily dismissed. But here it means something, because in Khmer mythology, mirrors were not symbols of vanity. They were tools of reflection, clarity, and protection used in rituals to repel spirits, to focus prayer, and occasionally to show rulers their true faces. Was this queen reminding herself of who she was beneath the borrowed titles, or reminding the world that what is unseen is not unfelt? You step back, the mirror fading into moss again. The temple is still. The wind stirs just enough to lift the leaves and cool your neck. The queens of this era didn't need to be remembered in full. They just needed to not be forgotten. The temple vanishes behind you as the forest deepens. Now even the moon is a rumor between branches. You walk by, feel earth beneath your soles, the occasional tug of a vine, the rhythmic rustle of leaves stirred by your passing. Your guide doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. She walks ahead like someone returning to a place she left in a hurry. You begin to understand that much of the history you're walking through isn't built from what was recorded. It's built from what was left behind. And some queens, they left behind silence so loud it still rings across centuries. You're about to meet one. She doesn't have a name, not even a title, just a story. It comes from a single source, a local legend passed down through oral tradition, mostly dismissed by historians, but quietly persistent in rural monasteries and among older women. It tells of a queen who vanished not once, but twice. The first time was dramatic. On the eve of an alliance marriage that would secure peace between 2 powerful Khmer provinces, she disappeared from her bridal chambers without a trace. No blood, no witnesses, just gone. Her attendants claimed she walked into the lotus pond behind the palace and never resurfaced. The second time was stranger. Years later, in a village far from the capital, a woman appeared. Same height, same eyes, same crescent-shaped birthmark near the ear. She didn't call herself a queen. She didn't call herself anything. She just tended herbs, sang lullabies in Sanskrit, and refused to speak of the palace. And then, poof, she vanished again. This time leaving behind a single item, a sandalwood comb wrapped in embroidered cloth, bearing the royal seal of a province that no longer existed. Historians still argue whether this woman was a queen, a runaway concubine, or a clever impersonator. But in the carvings of a now-collapsed temple near her village, there's a detail that turns the theory upside down, a mural of a woman surrounded by children planting rice. Not a throne in sight, but the figure wears the 5-peaked crown, used only in royal portraiture. That image sparked a scholarly debate that has yet to end. One side argues it proves nothing. The other side insists it reveals everything. Because here's the twist, the temple wasn't built for worship. It was built as a school for girls, founded during the reign of a now obscure king whose records suddenly list a spike in rice exports, midwifery training, and rural educational outposts for the female born. Sound like royal policy, sure. But if you believe the locals, and why wouldn't you at this point, it was her, the vanished queen, running things in exile. No coronation, no fanfare, just quiet, persistent action. You crouch near the foundation of what was likely one of those rural outposts. All that remains are a few bricks and fragments of terracotta figurines, dancers, fish, one small carving of a woman combing her hair. Not glamorous, just calm, present, human. Your guide kneels beside one of the stones and runs her fingers across a half-worn etching, a lotus blossom half submerged in waves. It's subtle. It's easy to miss. But it's the same symbol found on the cloth that once wrapped that sandalwood comb. A personal seal, used not in royal proclamations, but in private offerings, silent signatures to the divine. There's something deeply comforting in the idea, isn't there, that a queen could lose everything, her crown, her palace, her name, and still find power in the act of teaching, of planting, of healing. That her second disappearance wasn't defeat, it was choice. You rise and continue walking. The path winds along a narrow stream, now its banks damp and fragrant with wet leaves. The night hums with frogs and something like memory. You pass a fallen tree and spot carvings on its roots clearly added, long after it died. They mimic temple glyphs, but with feminine forms, women dancing, laughing, reaching toward the sky. Modern maybe. Or maybe they're part of a long continuum, quiet tributes, in places no one would think to look. One local story even claims she returned a third time. Not in person, in spirit. They say the exiled queen appears to women on the brink of decisions. Widows, mothers, daughters without dowries, that she doesn't speak, just watches until the woman makes her choice. Then she leaves behind something small, a pressed flower, a folded scrap of cloth, a carved bead. None of it verifiable, all of it beautifully, annoyingly plausible, because her story isn't about whether she ruled. It's about how she endured without the armor of recognition. You cross the stream on a log worn smooth. The air is cooler now, fresher. There's a stillness to this part of the forest, not of emptiness, but of reverence. You're walking in the footfalls of someone who refused to be only what the world named her. And perhaps that's the most powerful reign of all. The forest thins now just enough for moonlight to spill in wide, sleepy pools. You step through it slowly, careful not to disturb the peace that's settled here like dew. Your guide has vanished into the trees for a moment, leaving you at the edge of a low wall, moss-covered and circular, almost like the outline of a well or a ceremonial pit. But then you see the stairs, narrow, worn, leading downward. You descend. The air shifts, cooler, closer, and as your foot touches the stone floor below, you realize you've stepped into something sacred, not just in function, but in rhythm. This was once a birthing chamber. Now, before you conjure up images of incense and whispered prayers, let's pause. Khmer royal childbirth was not quiet. It was a cosmic event, and it wasn't always gentle or private. You're in the heart of a royal confinement pavilion, the kind only queens and high consorts used. Half temple, half celestial calculator, half fortress of silk and soot. And no, that's not too many halves. It was just that strange. Here's how it worked according to scattered inscriptions, old midwife accounts, and the occasional traveler's sketchbook. When a Khmer queen approached the 9th month, she was moved here to a windowless stone chamber, cooled by water channels carved into the floors. Above her, a ceiling with a small circular opening aligned precisely with the stars, specifically a set of constellations tied to birth omens and divine timing. She would lie here surrounded by astrologer priests and midwives beneath that shaft of starlight. Not because it looked pretty, but because the moon and Mars and Mercury were all involved in determining the fate of the child, whether he'd be a scholar, a warrior, or just another forgotten name on a palace wall. And here's the wild part: they waited for the exact second the stars aligned before encouraging labor. Midwives delayed or induced birth using oil's chants, and according to one fringe document, tapping specific areas of the queen's feet with carved sticks made of sacred wood. Yes, cosmic reflexology, ancient science meets divine pressure point. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or literal. Some say the timing was more ceremonial, with actual birth occurring naturally. Others insist the Khmers believed the exact alignment dictated the child's karma and therefore induced accordingly. You glance upward toward the shaft in the ceiling. It's still there, though no starlight reaches through now. Just a faint glimmer, a hint. But it's enough to imagine what it must have been like: a young queen terrified or thrilled, or just tired, lying still waiting for the universe to blink its permission. Not all royal births happened here, only the significant ones, the ones that required public rituals, offerings to ancestors, and enough sandalwood smoke to blur the edges of reality. Birth was political. Birth was legacy. A child born 1 hour too soon could lose a throne, or steal it. And what of the queens? What were they thinking during all this? One inscription, barely surviving on the side of a support beam, offers a clue. It reads, "He gave life as the moon turned and silence crowned me." Simple, haunting, possibly written by a queen, possibly by the priest overseeing the ritual. But either way, it centers her, not the child, not the king waiting outside. Her. You sit for a moment on a flat stone, perhaps once part of a birthing seat. The floor around you is etched with faint lotus patterns and what might be umbilical motifs, spirals, chords, rivers that fork and rejoin. And here's a lovely fringe detail. In at least 2 cases, queens reportedly gave birth to twins during these rituals. One set died young. The other one child became a king. The other vanished from the record entirely, possibly sent to a monastery, or perhaps raised as a royal advisor under a different name. Some speculate that these twin erasures were a way to prevent succession conflicts. You hear footsteps now. Your guide reappears, this time holding something small in her palm, a seed. She places it in your hand without a word, then walks toward a narrow doorway leading out the other side of the chamber. You rise, seed still warm in your fingers, and follow. Up another flight of stairs back into open air. The trees greet you like friends now. There's a sense of calm here. Not just because of the cool breeze or the moon that now hangs lower, closer like it's eavesdropping. It's because you understand something essential. This wasn't just about birth. It was about timing, precision, power wrapped in ritual, in waiting and choosing when to speak or breathe or push. Based on how the stars leaned that night, the queens of the Khmer Empire weren't just mothers. They were timekeepers. Not in clocks, but in cosmos. And they didn't just deliver heirs, they delivered dynasties. You leave the birthing chamber behind as though walking out of someone else's dream. The forest breathes more easily now, its rhythm gentler. You pass under low branches, their leaves trembling in a breeze too soft to feel, and step into a clearing that pulses with something less architectural and more primal. Music, no, but movement. Presence. This is where the queens danced. Not in ballrooms, not in spectacle. Here, under moonlight, surrounded by carved stones and thick mats of woven rattan, royal women performed rituals of motion, silence, and hair. Yes, hair. Because to understand the next queen, or perhaps priestess, or both, you have to understand that the Khmer world wasn't just built with bricks. It was woven with symbolism. And the most potent symbol of all wasn't a sword or scepter. It was a woman's uncut hair. She appears on temple walls more than once. Always central, always graceful. Hair coiled or better loose and flowing like river threads. One temple inscription refers to her simply as she who loosens storms. She wasn't just a dancer, she was a rainbringer, or at least that's what the legends say. The rituals were called Nang Mabak, roughly translated as serpent invitations. Women danced in circles, their arms mimicking the motion of coiled snakes. They sang softly, not words exactly, but intonations, sound patterns meant to mirror rainfall. And in the center of it all, a queen, always barefoot, always veiled, her hair soaked in scented oil and unbound at the climax of the ceremony. She would spin hair flying until it struck the air with enough force to summon thunder, or so the belief went. Historians still argue whether these dances were religious rites or royal propaganda. Some say they were agricultural ceremonies to please the Nagas, the divine serpent spirits who ruled water. Others believe they were demonstrations of fertility and control, turning female grace into political power. Whatever the truth, the hair mattered. Even the royal stylists, a specialized guild known as the Luk Tavik, treated hair as holy. It was never to be cut without astrological blessing, never to be tied tightly during monsoon season, and never, ever to be burned. That would risk a dry year or worse, miscarriage in the palace. You step into the circle now. Yes, it's still here. Faint depressions in the ground mark where dancers once moved, and near the edge, half buried in loam, lies a hair comb carved from ivory, its teeth curved like crescent moons, still intact, still waiting. Your guide crouches to pick it up, turning it over in her palm. She doesn't hand it to you. She places it gently at the center of the circle beside an offering bowl filled with dried flowers and what looks like a single strand of hair, black, fine, and longer than your arm. You won't ask how it survived. You'll just believe for tonight. The queen of the serpent dance, if she existed, wasn't a ruler in the traditional sense. She didn't sign edicts or lead armies, but she controlled something subtler. She ruled the thresholds between dry and wet, between temple and forest, between body and spirit. A single description survives of her from an 11th century court journal written by a scribe who clearly didn't know what to make of her. He called her the moving shadow who smiles with closed eyes and whose hair drinks the rain. Poetic, definitely. Reliable, possibly not. But isn't that always the way with queens who ruled outside the throne? Even today in some Cambodian provinces, female dancers prepare for festivals by letting their hair down for 3 days before the performance. They sleep facing the east. They avoid mirrors. They whisper water blessings into the comb before brushing, hoping to echo the power of their forgotten forerunner. Your guide now steps into the center of the circle, closes her eyes, and lifts her arms. She doesn't dance, not tonight, but you sense the memory in her bones. A rotation, a rhythm, something moving below the skin. And for a moment, you feel the air shift around you, slightly cooler, heavier with expectation, or maybe just nightfall finally settling. As you leave the circle, the wind picks up, soft but deliberate, enough to ruffle your shirt, stir your thoughts, enough to make the trees creak like old bones exhaling. Maybe it's coincidence, or maybe she's still here, the queen with sacred hair waiting for the next monsoon to fall. The breeze trails you like a memory as you leave the dance circle behind, carrying the scent of earth. Old wood and something sweeter, lotus root perhaps. or rice steamed in banana leaves. Your path narrows between leaning trees, then opens suddenly onto stone steps leading downward. But this time there is no temple, just a courtyard, low walls, no roof, and silence thick as honey. You're standing at the edge of the dynasty of daughters. It's a phrase carved only once, and even then faintly, on the base of a ruined shrine near Kampong Tom. Most historians missed it for decades, but once found the implications echoed everywhere. It suggests a period in Khmer history where royal lineage passed not from father to son, but through a tangle of sisters, nieces, and matrilineal threads that refuse to obey the royal script. You descend into the courtyard. There are no thrones here, no regal lions or towering gateways. What you see instead are 3 stone platforms, identical in size, spaced evenly. Atop each once stood a pavilion for a royal woman, sister queens, cousin consorts, an entire generation of women married not into one dynasty but across it. And here's where things get dizzying. In the mid-11th century, the royal family tree starts looking less like a line and more like a woven mat. One inscription names Queen Viralakshmi, who married a king, ruled alongside him then, when he died, reigned alone for a time. But another stele found miles away lists her as the daughter of another ruler's sister, to a third, an aunt to the next heir. Meanwhile, temple records suggest 2 other women, Sundar Dev and Yasodhara, with overlapping lifespans, held similar roles. Some think they were different names for the same queen. Others argue they were sisters, ruling side by side, each overseeing different provinces. And still others whisper it was intentional, a power-sharing arrangement among women who knew the risks of a single heir, of court betrayal, of placing all hope on one boy who might die from a fever, or be too interested in poetry, or worse, fall in love with the wrong nobleman's daughter. So instead they formed a circle, a dynasty not of kings but of queenly interdependence. No wonder inscriptions from this time grow careful, less declarative, more collaborative. More verbs like consulted, joined, co-ruled. Less conquered. Historians still argue whether this was an official arrangement or just a temporary response to civil unrest. But the architectural evidence points to deliberate planning. These weren't backup queens. They had separate courts, separate staff. One even had her own astrologer priest corps, something typically reserved for reigning monarchs. You pass between the platforms now. Weeds push through the stone and tree roots curl beneath your feet like veins. On one platform, a carved panel shows a trio of women beneath a sacred fig tree, each holding a different object, a scroll, a lotus flower, and a sword. One represents law, one faith, one sovereignty, all 3 in a single image. You sit briefly on the edge of a platform, feeling the sun-warmed stone through the fabric of the night. Your guide kneels nearby, eyes cast toward the east, perhaps in memory, perhaps in mimicry. One of the most persistent legends from this period speaks of the morning council's daily rituals, where the queens gathered not in a palace, but outdoors, seated in a triangle to discuss temple funding, legal disputes, and rainfall projections. It's said the oldest among them always arrived barefoot, a sign that she answered only to the land. You find a broken ceramic bowl nearby. Its rim is inscribed with 3 initials, ancient Khmer glyphs arranged in a ring. Too simple for coincidence, too symmetrical to ignore. You ask yourself, were these women remembered as queens or only as placeholders for the next king? Neither, perhaps. They were remembered as a whisper between the lines, a presence that shaped policy, prayer, and people without needing titles shouted across sandstone. You trace a name along a nearby lintel, mostly worn away. It might have said Jayaraja Devi or Jayarajan. The difference a matter of tone, of respect, of whether the scribe saw her as ruler or relative. Maybe she was both. You rise and follow your guide out of the courtyard. The air is warm again, tinged with wood smoke and night flowers. A single frog croaks somewhere. The stars above you are bright, scattered, and slightly askew, like a necklace unfastened. This dynasty of daughters didn't need a straight line. They wove power in spirals, and the kingdom somehow it held together. The path turns, and you follow, stepping across roots as thick as your arms and stones that still remember the weight of royal feet. Your guide moves slower now, not from fatigue, but from reverence. Ahead, the trees part to reveal something unexpected, less ruined than the places you've seen before. The walls still stand. The tower still stretches toward the stars, and carved into the stone lintel just above the entrance, an armillary sphere and a crescent moon. You've arrived at the temple of the Queen and the Astronomer. Her name doesn't survive, not fully. One inscription refers to her as Shri Deviksetra, a spiritual honorific meaning Sacred Lady of the Field of Gods. But it's unclear if that was her name, her title, or just how the priests decided to frame her after the fact. What we do know is that during a brief period in the late 11th century, this queen presided over temple constructions that aligned not with solstices or traditional cosmological markers, but with distant stars visible only in certain months, in certain parts of the kingdom. The mathematical precision of these alignments shocked early 20th century archaeologists who assumed such calculations were beyond the Khmer court's scope. But the carvings said otherwise. Specifically on this temple's inner sanctum walls, you'll find illustrations rare for Khmer architecture of celestial diagrams, star maps, not mythic wheels of rebirth or divine mountaintops, but constellations plotted like you'd see in an observatory. One panel even appears to depict the lunar node's key points used in eclipses and high-level astrology. And in the center of these carvings, always the same figure. A woman, hair braided, arms bare, holding what appears to be a stylus in one hand and a star chart in the other. No crown, no lion, just calculation. Beside her in several depictions is a man, always seated, always older, sometimes holding a scroll, sometimes gazing at her with something just shy of awe. He was likely an astronomer priest, one of many in the royal court. But oral traditions passed down by temple caretakers suggest something more personal. They say he was her teacher, her equal, her partner in both science and state. They say the temple itself was designed to honor both their contributions. One poem scratched into the stone in a back corridor reads, "She counted what I could not see, and I saw in her the pattern I had only guessed." It's unclear who wrote it. It could have been him. It could have been a court scribe watching them work. It could have been a devotee years later romanticizing what was simply collegial. But the temple remains, and its alignment impeccable. One of the main towers points not east, as is customary, but southeast directly toward the star canopus, visible only briefly in Cambodian skies. Why scholars still argue. Some think it marked the Queen's birthday. Others believe it predicted the onset of certain tides critical to rice farming. And then there's a theory that it aligned with a future eclipse the Queen had calculated decades in advance. None of it is confirmed. All of it feels possible. You step inside the sanctum. The air is cooler, the walls close, but not oppressive. There are no statues here, just stone shadow and silence. And then just above the altar you see it, a carving of the Queen, alone gazing upward. Her face is soft-focused, not worshipping, but measuring. She wasn't divine. She was exact. The fringe stories, of course, spin it differently. They say she and the astronomer were forbidden lovers brought together by numbers torn apart by politics, that their charts were encoded letters, that the temple was built to remember their secret language written in stars. Others claim she was a goddess incarnate, born with the ability to hear planets turning, that she chose a mortal companion to help her Map the heavens before returning to the sky herself. Romantic, yes. Probable, questionable. But when you sit here, legs folded on cool stone heart, beating slowly in the hush, you start to understand how the lines blur between science and story, between sovereignty and stillness. Your guide places something in your hand. It's a shard of terracotta painted with dots faded, but clearly once part of a star chart. She tilts her head toward the ceiling, where if you squint, a single shaft of moonlight pierces through a gap in the roof. It lands precisely on the Queen's carved eye. Accident, maybe. Or maybe she calculated even this, knowing that someday, long after her name was gone, her gaze would still follow the stars. You step out of the astronomer's temple and into a garden, or what's left of one. The layout remains, even if the trees have long since gone wild. You walk between rows of stone planters, their edges worn smooth by rain and time. Herbs once grew here: beetle, lemongrass, ginger root, royal basil, but not for medicine, not for ceremony, for food. And here in the heart of the royal compound, near no throne and far from any battlefield, you meet another kind of queen, the one who ruled not with decrees or dances, but with flavor. This is the realm of power in the kitchen court. Yes, there was one. The royal kitchens of Angkor were not just for cooking, they were for controlling. Records carved on the inner walls of a lesser-known temple describe meal offerings with a precision bordering on obsessive. The number of mangoes delivered each morning, the height of the rice piles, the ideal texture of fish paste. But between those culinary data points hides a quieter story. A queen, likely unnamed again, oversaw this system not just as a domestic task, but as a web of influence. The allocation of spices, the order in which dishes were served, the timing of deliveries, all of it was politics in the language of hunger. Historians still argue whether this woman was a formal queen or a favored consort who rose to power through household authority. What's undeniable is that several temple inscriptions link royal festivals, especially coronations and fertility rites, not to priestly planning, but to her menus. One set of offerings recorded for a midsummer lunar ceremony includes salted jackfruit fermented 3 weeks ahead, river prawns wrapped in banana blossom, and a herbal reduction known only to the Lady of the South Courtyard. That last title appears nowhere else in the records, but it appears 4 times in the kitchen logs of 3 different temples. Clearly, someone was paying attention. And here's the unexpected twist. 2 of those recipes show up in modern Cambodian cuisine, still made, still remembered, still whispered to have once been fit for a queen. You walk now beneath a wooden trellis fallen in places, but still bearing the patterns of vines long dead. Beneath your feet, shattered ceramic pots rest like forgotten echoes. Some still carry traces of blackened soot. Others faint etchings. Fish flame a woman's silhouette, with her hair tied high and her sleeves rolled to her elbows. You can almost hear her voice, sharp and warm, directing, scolding, tasting, commanding. In a world where kings held swords, she held a ladle and people obeyed. Not because they feared her, because they depended on her. Food in the Khmer court wasn't just sustenance, it was diplomacy. When foreign emissaries visited, the queen of the kitchen chose the menu. Sweet dishes before spicy, that meant negotiation was possible. Sour broths with bitter greens, that meant proceed with caution. No mangoes at all, you may as well turn around and go home. One chronicler from Champa recorded a meal served during treaty discussions with the Khmer court. He writes, "We were greeted with 5 courses each, colder than the last, and none sweetened. The queen did not appear, but her voice was in the broth." That line stuck. Your guide now leads you toward a stone basin, once used for rinsing rice. Inside, it's dry, empty, but nestled in the basin's edge is a small spoon carved from tamarind wood. worn but intact. Its handle is curved, its bowl deep, far too fine to have been used by servants. Likely ceremonial, possibly hers. You hold it for a moment, thumb tracing the edge. It's light, simple, but heavy with repetition. This spoon might have tasted royal curries, might have stirred the first morning pot before a coronation, might have served a dish that sealed a peace agreement. She isn't remembered with a statue. She isn't named in the king's death rites, but her spices still speak. Your guide gestures toward the edge of the garden. There, beyond a crumbling gate, is a long, low pavilion, half-collapsed roof, missing. This was the open-air kitchen. Designed to carry smoke away from royal chambers, its placement was precise. But so was its symbolism. The kitchen faced east toward the rising sun, toward beginnings, and the queen who ruled it. She began things too. Policies, alliances, pregnancies. Nothing started without her consultation, and nothing lasted long if her pots stayed cold. As you walk away, the scent of cardamom seems to rise from the very earth. Memory, perhaps. Or maybe a trick of your mind made stronger by hunger and quiet. But one thing is clear, power didn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it wore an apron. You step away from the scent of ash and spice, following your guide through narrow passageways once used by servants' messengers, and perhaps on rare, significant days, the queen herself. The stone underfoot is worn smooth by countless soft sandals. Here power passed not in declarations, but in whispers, and now you're approaching one such whisper, the tale of the dowager's return. There's a peculiar energy in this part of the compound, not eerie, not grand, just weighty. Like everything here knows it was once dismissed and is now quietly proving it never left. You pass beneath an arched doorway. Faint, almost apologetic, is a carving on the lintel. A single flower, wide-petaled and open its stem, curling into a spiral, a symbol of return. The queen who lived here had once ruled beside a powerful king, most likely a warrior king, judging by the battlefield inscriptions from his reign. She bore his heir, presided over temples, kept order in the court, and then, as tradition dictated, she disappeared after his death. That was standard. Widowed queens, especially elder ones, often retreated into spiritual life, secluded pavilions, limited speech, a role somewhere between nun and relic. Seen but quiet, revered but not relevant. Except she didn't stay gone. One inscription calls her the one who speaks after fire. Another refers to her simply as grandmother of rule. And in the royal annals, often devoid of female names, there's a sudden shift in tone. Edicts once signed only by kings begin to include phrases like in consultation with the Eastern matron, or per her ancestral guidance. She came back not in defiance, but in demand. Not to rule overtly, but to influence completely. Historians still debate what caused her return. A crisis of succession, a failed crop year, or the quiet realization that the new generation wasn't quite ready. The records don't say, but the shift is there. One moment, she's gone. The next, the kingdom listens when she coughs. You step into her pavilion. It's humble by royal standards. No grand throne, no ritual basin. But near the center is a stone bench, worn smooth with a view of 3 intersecting walkways. She could see everything from here, every ambassador's approach, every novice monk's path, every servant carrying news. She didn't shout. She waited. And those who passed through this courtyard, they came back changed. According to legend, she once sent a letter to a rebellious provincial governor using only one item, a folded leaf with the words, "You were once my child," pressed into it with heated bronze. The governor surrendered without bloodshed. Another tale told in temple murals is that she conducted governance through dreams. If she disapproved of a policy, the responsible minister would fall ill until it was reversed. Political flu, some scholars joke, But the pattern is suspicious. Was it manipulation? Maybe. Was it respect? Definitely. Because here's what makes her story different. She didn't re-emerge for power. She re-emerged for continuity. When younger royals were too brash, too eager, she grounded them. When priests grew indulgent, she rebalanced the offerings. When foreign merchants arrived with silk and threats, she made sure the king's council served rice before questions. One document translated awkwardly from a Sanskrit Khmer hybrid describes her as she who keeps the thread from snapping. She wasn't thunder, she was the needle. Your guide now pauses near the eastern wall, where sunlight would have entered each morning, brushing against a carved panel now broken across its base. What remains is subtle, the image of a veiled woman seated among trees, a scroll in one hand, her other resting on a child's head. She's not labeled, but this scene repeats in 3 other temples, always in a quiet place, always facing east, always unspoken. It's her, watching, teaching, returning. There's something defiant in it, even now, because the expectation was that queens retire and fade, but she wrote herself back in, not through stone, but through silence, through influence, through legacy. And now she may be the reason this entire line of succession held together for another century. Your guide steps away, brushing a leaf from her shoulder. You follow. A breeze picks up behind you, scattering fallen petals across the stone bench. And you wonder, how many times was she underestimated? How many times did her stillness unmake chaos? Because not all queens rule by flame. Some return like dusk, slow, steady, inescapable. You walk in silence now, the last of the dowager's presence fading like smoke into the treetops. Ahead, your guide lifts a branch that droops like a curtain, and you duck beneath it into a small enclosed court. The space feels forgotten, intimate, accidental. You pause at the threshold, not because of reverence, but because of curiosity. Here, amid low stone pedestals and overgrown grass, the royal masks fall away, and in their place, objects so ordinary they become precious. Welcome to the world of hairpins and heirlooms. This is where the queens were most themselves, not in grand processionals or temple dedications, but in the quiet rooms of preparation, reflection, and legacy. The places where combs outlasted crowns. You step toward a row of shallow alcoves carved into the wall. Each was once a storage niche, a place to keep ceremonial items, jewelry brushes, incense holders, perfumes, and more mysteriously, boxes, small, lacquered, intricately etched. Some were shaped like lotuses, others like sleeping birds. Inside these boxes were what the court called inheritances of silence, not riches, not official seals, but personal heirlooms, a carved hairpin, a mirror fragment, a ribbon stained with tamarind dye, or a ring once pressed into the palm of a daughter on her wedding day. You kneel beside one such box, its lid long gone. What's left inside is blackened by time, but still legible, a strip of copper etched with 7 glyphs. Their meaning is unclear, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a name, perhaps the only written record of a queen who never sat on a throne, but shaped everything from behind a curtain. Historians still argue whether these heirlooms held ritual value or were simply sentimental tokens. But one stele uncovered only recently complicates things. It lists 10 items donated by a royal woman to the temple treasury, 5 bangles, 2 anklets, and 3 hairpins. All were described not in terms of metal weight or gemstone count, but by memory. One was the pin worn during the rain festival. Another, the bangle I wore the day peace was restored. In Khmer belief, items carried history, not just function. The act of passing them on was considered a transfer of lived experience, like planting a memory in another body. Your guide picks up a fallen comb from the dirt, made of ivory, its teeth delicate but intact. She brushes it gently against her palm, then hands it to you. You turn it over. On the spine, someone once carved a flower. But close inspection reveals it's not just a flower. It's a calendrical glyph marking the 5th day of the waxing moon. Likely the date of birth, or coronation, or a long-forgotten moment made permanent in ornament. The courtyard is filled with such objects, half buried, half remembered. A bronze anklet nestled in the roots of a tree. A silk cord wrapped around a rock. A broken sandalwood box resting beneath a collapsed roof tile. None of it labeled, all of it real. And here's where the stories drift into the strange. One folk tale says that each queen left behind a single object, hidden somewhere in the palace. Not for show, not for worship, but as a test. The one who finds the queen's memory, the tale says, is ready to carry the queen's silence, whatever that means. Some believe it's metaphor. Others insist young noblewomen were once trained in this exact courtyard, told to find the hidden item to inherit, the invisible crown passed from woman to woman in soft steps and lowered voices. Maybe that's why so few of these heirlooms are displayed in museums. They were never meant to be found by the world, only by the right girl. You wander through the courtyard, stepping softly, eyes scanning the ground. You find a fragment of mirror, its surface cloudy, its edges worn, but still reflecting just enough moonlight to catch your eye. You don't need to take it. The story is already yours. Because here, far from throne rooms and war councils, the queens whispered through objects. They passed down what couldn't be written in law. How to wait, how to remember, how to remain whole when the world forgets your name. You glance at your guide, who now sits quietly beneath a crooked fig tree. In her lap, a cloth bundle neatly folded, tied with a braid of dried grass. She doesn't open it. She doesn't have to. This is the legacy that mattered most. The heirloom courtyard fades behind you as your guide rises from beneath the fig tree cloth bundle still untouched in her hands. She leads you down a narrow slope where the ground grows softer. The trees older and the air takes on a stillness that smells like old incense and wet stone. You've walked far from the center of things, out of ceremony, out of legend, and into aftermath. This is where you meet the last crowned woman of the Khmer Empire. This is the story of the queen of a dying empire. Her name is a ghost among the records, faint, fractured, possibly rewritten. She may have been the wife of Indra Jayavarman, or perhaps of a later, less documented king, who inherited a kingdom crumbling at the edges. Palaces flooded, trade routes raided, and the once mighty temples slowly abandoned to vines and wind. But her presence is undeniable. You stand now before a temple fragment, once part of her sanctuary, small, modest, and strangely poignant. The carvings are simpler than in earlier centuries. Less flourish, more clarity. The friezes show not divine battles or celestial conquests, but domestic scenes, a woman lighting a lamp, distributing food, laying flowers at a shrine. This queen, whoever she was, spent her reign trying to hold together what remained, not with armies, not with grand projects, but with gestures of faith and care. One inscription left on a sandstone stela, now half buried, reads, "When the doors fall inward, I will keep the lamp alight." Historians still argue whether this was written by her or about her. Some suggest it refers to literal temple doorways destroyed during regional conflict. Others think it's metaphor, a promise to preserve cultural light during political darkness. You step into the broken threshold of her temple. Inside, the floor is cracked but clean. Someone, likely local villagers, still tends it. A small offering of lotus petals and rice sits on a slab where a statue used to be. The wind flows through the open space like breath. You feel her here, not in grandeur, but in gravity. She is the queen who tried. Records say she wrote letters to foreign courts, Asking for peace talks sent rice to provinces too dry to plant sponsored a full moon festival, even as taxes fell and priests quietly left for other kingdoms. She composed poems, soft, resigned, almost meditative. One fragment survives: I gave incense to emptiness, and it returned as quiet. She ruled through stillness, through persistence, through the radical act of not leaving when everything else did. You find a corner of the temple marked by a grid of dots carved into the wall. Astrological marks, prayer positions, maybe both, but one row ends early, stopping abruptly as if mid-thought, as if she was interrupted. It's here that her story ends, or disappears. No death record, no ceremonial pyre, no tomb known with certainty to be hers. She vanishes into the mist of late empire like a final breath released but not wasted. And yet, even in vanishing, she left resonance. In later folk songs sung by Cambodian grandmothers, there are lines about the woman who sang to the last fire. One lullaby mentions a queen who fed elephants with her own hands when the court could no longer afford handlers. Even now, her name, whichever version survives, is invoked when endurance matters more than triumph. Your guide kneels near the temple's back wall. There, tucked into a niche, is a single votive bowl. It contains nothing but dust, yet she bows to it. You do the same. Because here's the truth of dying empires: they don't end all at once. They decay, collapse, recede like tides. And someone always stays to turn out the lights, to offer rice, to whisper the last prayer that was her. The queen who watched her empire fade, not with rage or denial, but with patience. Not all rulers go down swinging. Some go down singing. And sometimes that's braver. You rise slowly from your kneel, the dust from the votive bowl clinging faintly to your hands. The wind shifts behind you, rustling the trees as if they've just remembered something. Your guide is already moving again, not back toward the center, but deeper into a tangle of roots and half-visible paths that curve like the memory of footfalls. Here you walk not toward monuments, but toward murmurs, because now you enter the era that followed the long forgetting. The centuries where vines swallowed palaces and the jungle exhaled silence. But even silence keeps secrets. Welcome to the realm of echoes beneath the jungle. For centuries after the Khmer Empire's fall, the temples of Angkor became ghost cities. Farmers planted rice at the foot of towers. Monks kept rituals alive in roofless sanctuaries. Bats made roosts where kings once prayed. But in all this, one question persisted. Where were the queens buried? Even now we don't know. Kings had mausoleums, cremation mounds, and temples carved in their image. But the queens vanished into oral tradition. Unmarked tombs, or perhaps something more hidden. In recent years, archaeologists have begun using light or laser-based mapping technology to scan beneath the jungle canopy. What they found startled them. Grid patterns, substructures, courtyards, foundations of what appear to be women's quarters, royal compounds within royal compounds, tucked behind temples, walled gardens, bathing pools with aqueducts, spaces never documented in surviving records. One such complex discovered near Ta Prohm includes a network of chambers carved with unusually domestic scenes, women weaving, tending fruit trees, lighting lamps. But here's the detail that caught everyone off guard. One wall shows a woman seated on a throne alone. No king beside her, no god above her, just her. And in her lap, an open book. Historians still argue whether this depicts a queen, a goddess, or an idealized scholar wife. But it's the only known carving in Angkor where the throne is not shared. Deeper within these ruins, archaeologists found burial niches, small sealed chambers long looted but still holding traces. Bone beads mirror shards, and a crown base formed not from gold, but from compressed bark. Lightweight, delicate, clearly ceremonial, possibly funerary. Some believe this was the burial site of a queen who died in exile. Others think it was a hidden resting place for women whose power was deemed too dangerous or too sacred to be remembered by name. And then there are the songs. Local villagers, long before modern archaeologists arrived, sang lullabies about the ladies of the under-temple women who slept beneath the roots guarding wisdom and watching the stars from below. You walk now through one of these partially excavated spaces. Roots break through the ceiling. Ferns drip moisture onto cracked tiles. The air smells like rain even though it hasn't fallen in hours. You step carefully, your guide silent beside you, her eyes moving over the stones like she's reading Braille. One inscription here, barely visible, easily overlooked, reads, "She was placed beneath so her dreams might rise above." Interpret it how you will, a poetic metaphor, a burial ritual, or a quiet confession, because what emerges from this space is not just mystery but insistence. These women weren't forgotten because they lacked importance. They were forgotten because they mattered in ways no one wanted to preserve. There's another fringe theory among modern scholars that the queens of Angkor participated in rituals of deliberate disappearance, choosing to be buried not with monuments but with metaphors, their names hidden inside place names, their ashes scattered into sacred ponds that fed rice paddies, their stories locked in song. In some parts of Cambodia, even today, women still place combs under their pillows on the eve of their daughters' weddings. Not for luck, but because, as one grandmother put it, that's where the queens hide. Your guide places her hand on a stone at the center of this ruin. It's small, plain, nothing distinguishes it, but her fingers rest there with certainty, and then you feel it too. Beneath the ruins, beneath the soil, beneath the centuries of forgetting, there is still heat, still echo, still presence. You stand in the final silence of a dynasty. But silence isn't absence, it's storage, waiting for you to listen. You step back into daylight, though it feels quieter now, like the forest knows you've just walked through someone else's resting place. Your guide waits at the tree line, arms folded, gently gaze toward the horizon. The path ahead is wider here, strewn with fallen leaves and broken brick, as if even the earth itself has begun to crumble under the weight of all it remembers. Because now you walk into the long shadow cast not by nature but by narrative. This is the chapter titled "Who Wrote the Queens Out?" For all the carvings you've seen, figures in flowing robes, quiet women etched into temple walls, poetic stelae tucked behind altar stones. The absence is louder than the presence. So few names, so many titles that mean everything and nothing. The queen, the consort, the lady of the Eastern Pavilion. Never the architect, the strategist, the ruler. So you ask out loud maybe, or maybe only in your thoughts, who decided the queens didn't matter enough to preserve fully who edited the story? The answers aren't simple. Some point to shifting dynasties, new kings who erased their predecessors' wives to rewrite legitimacy. Others suggest religious realignments, a shift from local goddesses to imported gods, from female-centered rituals to patriarchal mythologies. And then there's politics, always scribes who only recorded what was ordered, and patrons who chose what lasted in stone. Historians still argue whether the omission was systemic or circumstantial. Was it accidental erasure or carefully curated silence? You arrive now at a quiet terrace overgrown with grass. Along the low wall, inscriptions run like the hem of a garment, long, looping, and interrupted. Several lines have been chiseled out, not weathered, removed. The work is too clean. Someone didn't just forget her. Someone chose to. One stele discovered near the ancient city of Isanapura contains a rare confession. Carved in the voice of a royal priest, it reads, "We do not name her, lest her name outlive the king." That's it. That's the whole justification. A woman too powerful, too central to be allowed a place in the immortal story. And yet you've met her already, haven't you? In the kitchens, in the birth chamber, in the serpent dance, in the unmarked tomb. She's been here all along. Because history doesn't really forget, it just hides. And some things, when buried, learn how to bloom underground. You pause near a column toppled but still bearing an inscription, half concealed by vines. You brush them aside. The characters are clear. Sanskrit, Old Khmer, a blend. She taught without scrolls. She ruled without banners. She remains. 3 lines, no name, no date. But you know who they mean. And here's a strange detail on several ancient temple ceilings. Invisible from most angles, tiny figures were carved upside down. Women mostly. Hands raised, hair flowing. Art historians believe they were left there by rebellious stone carvers honoring queens in secret. Others think they were ritual symbols of protection meant to keep temples from collapsing. Either way, someone wanted the queens to stay, if only above our heads, out of reach, too high for time to erase. You sit for a moment on the edge of the terrace. Your guide offers you a cup of cool water from a clay pot she's carried since the beginning. You hadn't noticed it until now. You drink. The water is faintly sweet, earthy, real. And then she speaks, not loudly, just enough. "Do you remember them now?" she asks. You nod. It's not about recovering every name, every date, every decree. It's about not accepting the blank spaces as empty. It's about recognizing the pattern. The brush of silk against stone, the scent of mango leaf before ceremony, the silence that isn't silence, it's strategy. Because every time someone left a name out, a woman made sure her actions stayed in. And that more than any inscription is how she still reigns. You stand again, the last of the cool water still tingling on your tongue. The trees are beginning to thin now. You can hear crickets more clearly, and somewhere a dog barking in the far distance. Civilization, not modern, not loud, but human, is near. And so are they. The queens, not the ones from stele or sculpture, but the ones living now, walking Cambodian soil, often barefoot, often unnoticed. This is the final living chapter, modern queens in silk and shadow. You follow your guide through a narrow path edged with wild banana trees. Ahead, a small wooden house tilts slightly on stilts, its roof patched with sheet metal and palm thatch. It's early morning now, though. You didn't notice time passing, and the scent of boiled rice and salt fish curls from the open window. She waves you forward, then steps aside. Inside sits a woman, maybe 70, her hands stained from dye, her lap filled with soft fabric. She's embroidering a ceremonial sampot, a traditional Cambodian garment. But this one is unusual. The central motif is a serpent twined around a moon. You recognize it instantly. It's the same design carved into the wall of the Queen's bath chamber centuries ago. The woman doesn't look up. She just says softly, "It's from my grandmother's grandmother. The pattern comes to me when I don't try too hard." Her fingers move quickly, confidently, like someone tracing an old path blindfolded. These women, present-day bearers of forgotten tradition, don't call themselves queens, but they are. In the way they remember, in the way they teach. Without saying, it's a lesson. You walk through a market later, the air thick with humidity and the laughter of vendors. A woman in her 40s sells palm sugar wrapped in banana leaves. On the front of her cart, hand-painted a queen in silhouette, holding a lotus. People think it's just decoration, she tells you. But I saw her once, in a dream, hair down, standing in the river. Further along, an older woman adjusts an offering in front of her shop. Jasmine garlands a clay bowl of rice and a photo, not of Buddha, not of a king, but of a dancer, hair unbound, eyes closed, silent, sacred. She catches you looking. "It's for the queen," she says. She helps my daughters grow up strong. She doesn't explain further. She doesn't need to. Historians still argue whether modern Khmer women carry the legacy of royal matriarchy consciously, or if the rituals and roles evolved separately. Some call it coincidence, others call it survival. But in the marketplace, in the fabric shops, in the incense-swirled corners of pagodas, it doesn't matter what you call it, you feel it. They never left. Even Cambodian pop music occasionally sings of them not by name, but by symbol. One hit song from a few years back, half love song, half anthem, included the line, "She ruled without needing a kingdom," and women danced to it at weddings with their heads held a little higher. One NGO-run school for girls near Siem Reap names each classroom after a different female ancestor, not just the ones from official history, the ones whispered about in the back corners of old houses. A sign above the chalkboard reads, "She stood in silence so we could speak." It's not defiance, it's inheritance. You pass a mural now near the edge of the town. It's faded, done in chalk and paint and time. It shows 4 women in different postures, one grinding herbs, one reading, one seated in meditation, and one simply walking away, hand raised in farewell. No names. But beneath them, a line reads, "Still queens, just quieter now." Your guide stops walking. She points to the sky. The clouds have cleared. The moon is visible, faint low, but watching, and beside it, a single star blinks stubbornly in dawn's approach. She always comes back, your guide says. They all do. And as you look around at the market, the shrine, the school, the dancer on the rice bag label, you realize she's right. The queens of the Khmer Empire didn't vanish. They just changed addresses. You walk the last leg of the journey slowly now. The sky is soft with morning light, but the story hasn't ended, not yet. The path winds back toward where you began, the edge of the old city, where trees loom like guardians and stones peer out like old friends who've waited long enough. And standing there by the same cracked gate where the journey started is your guide. But this time, she's facing you, no longer leading, no longer silent. Her eyes carry centuries. This is the final passage, still reigning in sleep. She doesn't speak, not out loud, but you understand what she's saying. The queens are not gone. They never were. You've just walked their empire, not the one of flags and monuments, but the one built of breath and thread, dance and decree, steam rising from kitchens and the weight of starlight on a laboring woman's brow. They reigned without statues. They ruled without chronicles, but they left their fingerprints everywhere. You turn and look around. That tree. A hairpin was found at its base. That pool, still fed by the same aqueduct, a dowager queen ordered fixed. That shrine, a prayer written by a royal daughter, now sung by schoolgirls. The story of the Khmer Empire may be cast in stone, but the story of its women was cast in softer things, fabric, gesture, shadow, memory. Historians still argue whether these queens had formal power, but you know the answer now. They ruled in every way that mattered, through choice, through caretaking, through vanishing when it was safest, through reappearing when it was needed. You glance one more time toward the towers in the distance, Angkor Wat rising like the spine of a sleeping dragon. The sun is touching the tip of the tallest spire now, and for the first time, you notice how feminine it really is. Not delicate balanced, tall but not looming, ornate but not shouting, built not just for the gods, but perhaps by women who remembered what gods had forgotten. Your guide nods once. You step forward, back into the present, but you carry something with you now, not knowledge exactly, not quite history, something quieter. And as you start to feel the soft weight of your own breath, slow and even and steady, you remember what one queen once said, carved into a temple no one visits anymore: to reign is to remain. And she did. They all did. Right here where stone and leaf whispered together. Right here where sleep finally takes you, let it all slow now. The footsteps, the memory, even the trees. Let them fade. Let the soil grow warm again beneath your back and the air turn smooth against your skin, like silk worn thin by generations of queens before you. They are not asking you to remember every name. They are not asking you to recite dates or correct pronunciations. All they want is for you to rest, to carry their quiet, to notice the softness in power, to believe that being written out doesn't mean being erased. Feel the last of the breeze pass gently through the leaves overhead. Let it brush across your eyelids. Let it carry away the questions. You're not alone now. You've walked with them. You've heard their stories, even the ones whispered too softly for history to hear. And whether you dream of moonlit temples or warm kitchens, silver combs or starlit processions, know that the queens are not gone. They're here. They reign in breath, in pause, in memory. And now they reign in you too. So breathe deeply. Let your body soften. Let the quiet arrive like silk over your shoulders. And if in your dreams you see her hair unbound, gaze calm, hand outstretched, just follow. She knows the way. End of script. Sweet dreams.